Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio, radio, no pictures live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the various efforts, both direct and indirect, to undermine and destroy Western democracy. Now, democracy cannot coexist with the ideological imposition of globalist government. The two just cannot exist. So there can no longer be such a thing as a sovereign government. And if there can't be sovereign governments, then there's no need for democracy. Now, they may keep the apparition, of democracy as you vote and you pretend, but it's not going to be democracy. So they have to undermine it in various ways, which they are doing quite successfully, in my view. I mean, there are obvious ways, like they make sure it's a two-party system, but the globalists control those two parties and all the candidates in it and all the policies that they pursue. So there's that. But there's also other indirect ways to undermine it, and importing lots of people from third world countries where they have no long-standing tradition or any tradition of democracy. Then they view democracy as simply some sort of device to just get what they want to serve the interests of their community, rather than voting on the issues. Now, in particularly local councils, it's not necessarily happening in the bigger scene, but I think that's very close. In fact, it is happening just on maybe a smaller scale. But in local council elections, there are hugely corrupt, cabals and groups in local councils. Always have been, by the way, but particularly now these race and religious groups are involved, like Islamic groups or Indians and Pakistanis or whatever. So wherever you get a concentration of migrants, and again from the third world, that's very important. First world people understand democracy and work with it. Third world people don't. They have got no concept of it in reality, and they become very clannish. They're people come to a white country and they're determined to not share or give, but to take everything they can, and think they're entitled to do it, and that they're given the vote without any obligation to be a citizen is another way that the West undermines itself. The idea, if you're a citizen, that you have an obligation to the civis, but these migrants do believe they have no obligation. The only obligation is to their tribe and their family, not to the civis, which means it undermines the very concept and the integrity of democracy when you give people like that the vote. Now, it's even worse than that, though, because say Indians who may be a third generation, their grandparents or great grandparents came to Australia or the West, and they're third generation Western born. But they still believe, and what encouraged this video was I was talking to an Indian recently who was very pleasant, by the way. Nothing negative to say about them, but their view was, even though she was second generation born, so her grandparents came to Australia as young people, so her parents were born here and she was born in Australia. But in a local council election, she's telling me, no, she must vote for an Indian candidate because the interests of Indians must be represented. We have a right to a bigger piece of the pie. Why? We must be in the front line when they're handing out the goodies. We must make sure we are. Why? And so on. I'm listening to this, thinking, well, hold on a minute, aren't you Australian? Aren't you Australian? No, I'm Indian, and I'm going to vote for Indian interests and Indian group interests, Indian racial interests, and Indian such and such. We don't have enough Indian community halls here. The council must have, but aren't community halls meant to be for the community, which is everybody? No, they meant, we want Indian community halls. And she was quite vehement and emphatic in that requirement. And again, she's, her parents were born in Australia, but she shows absolute 100% Indian in-group preference. Now, if you look at some of the local council elections that have occurred, not just in Australia, but in Britain and elsewhere around the West, where there are large sort of migrant groups, you'll find that certainly in many instances where the majority group is, say, Islamic, for example, or Indian. It doesn't really matter, but they're not local, local people, and they're not people that perceive themselves as citizens. This is the critical sort of point here. They perceive themselves as strangers in a strange land, looking out for their own interests, and they have no interest in integrating or assimilating. So we want to be different, and we also want to claim to be victims of being strangers in a strange land. I mean, it's it's an interesting take on things, but an interesting attitude to have. But how can you both be, I refuse to assimilate, but I want to be a victim, and then I want compensation for the victimhood? I mean, fuck. But nonetheless, so in an area with Islamic majority, then the Islamic candidate is being elected to the council, and it's a case in Britain that the candidate that wins the election gets up and says, this is a vote for what's happening in Gaza. This is a vote for Islam. This is a vote for Muhammad. And this sort of thing. And you go, well, hey, hold on a minute. You're in a Western country and you're voting in you're representative. Don't you represent the community or the country? But they've got no desire to be a citizen. None. Zip. Zero. Nada, zilch. So in this particular area, there's a large Middle Eastern Islamic presence, and then the next group is Indian, and the third group was like Albanian or somewhere not Albania. Anyway, another, and they came 1, 2, 3 in the order of voting. So these people aren't voting for the issues. They don't give a fuck about the potholes on the road or whether the schools are crap. They don't give a shit. What they care about is in-group preference along racial and religious lines, and they're effortlessly encouraged to vote. Now, I don't know what coercions and what inducements and bribes or whatever it might be to, whether there's ballot fixing or something. I don't know, but the idea or the outcomes are that in these areas they're voting single issue candidates. So there's a number of candidates in Britain, for example, that are being elected purely on the basis that they want the war in Gaza condemned, the Israeli activity in Gaza condemned, and they're getting voted for that in England in a local council election for a council that has nothing to do with, has no power, authority, or anything over that conflict. But they want to engage in these fruitless, idiotic, symbolic gestures that mean nothing, rather than getting on with the work at hand, such as doing garbage collection efficiently, and again fixing potholes in roads and maintenance of public buildings, things like that. That's what these people are elected for. So by giving the vote to people that do not perceive themselves as citizens, then that is a very, very effective way of undermining the principle and the practice and the purpose of democracy. And I think the globalists want this and encourage it. And I think that's why they encourage it, because it's just yet another way of putting another nail in the coffin of Western society's Western way of life and Western democracy. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.